What if the world map you grew up with was incomplete, not inaccurate, not outdated, but deliberately edited? Because for centuries, maps showed something that modern atlases no longer do: a vast territory labeled with one unsettling name, Tartaria. It stretched across enormous portions of Eurasia, dwarfing modern nations, appearing again and again on official maps made by respected cartographers. Then, almost suddenly, it vanished. Not gradually, not debated. It disappeared. Today's story is about those old world maps that exposed Tartaria's real borders, and then quietly slipped out of circulation. And once you understand what these maps implied, you'll understand why they couldn't remain public. This isn't about fantasy. It's about cartography, geopolitics, and historical erasure. And it begins with a question most people never ask. Why would so many accurate maps agree on something that never existed? In the early modern period, between the 1500s and 1800s, maps were not decorative objects, they were strategic tools. Empires relied on them for trade routes, taxation, military campaigns, and diplomacy. A cartographer who made things up didn't stay employed for long. And yet, across European, Russian, and Asian archives, we find detailed maps showing Great Tartary, Independent Tartary, and Chinese Tartary clearly bordered, labeled, and treated as real geopolitical regions. These maps were drawn by professionals, royal mapmakers, naval cartographers, men whose careers depended on accuracy. So here's the first cliffhanger. If Tartaria was imaginary, why was it mapped with such confidence? Now, before we go further, let's reset for a second. Imagine explaining to your friends that an entire civilization vanished from maps and textbooks. They'd probably look at you the way people look at someone who says, "I don't trust elevators." Funny until you remember elevators can actually fall. History works the same way. Let's move on. As we examine these old maps, something striking appears. Tartaria wasn't depicted as a chaotic wilderness. It had internal divisions, borders, cities, trade routes, in some cases, even flags and coats of arms. This suggests administration, governance, structure, but modern history tells us something very different. We're told these regions were sparsely populated, tribal, technologically behind, waiting to be developed by expanding empires. Both versions cannot be true. And here's where things get uncomfortable. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, as global power structures shifted, Tartaria began to shrink on maps. Borders softened, labels changed, regions were renamed, absorbed, or reclassified as vague territories. And then, suddenly, the word itself vanished. No official announcement, no academic consensus debate, just gone. Which raises the second major question: what happened during that period that made Tartaria inconvenient? One explanation offered by mainstream historians is that Tartaria was merely a vague European term for unknown lands. But that explanation falls apart when you look closely. Vague lands aren't given borders. They aren't subdivided. They aren't labeled consistently across centuries. Maps don't do that accidentally, and now comes the part most people miss. As Tartaria disappeared from maps, a new historical narrative solidified, one where modern empires emerged from supposedly primitive regions, bringing order, technology, and governance. But what if that narrative required something else to be erased first? Consider this. If Tartaria represented a complex, organized civilization that didn't fit the story of linear progress, it would challenge the idea that modern power structures were inevitable, and history doesn't like challenges. Let's pause here for a quick pattern interrupt. Ask yourself this honestly. How often do you question maps? We question news. We question governments. But maps, we trust them completely. Funny, isn't it, that the thing defining borders and nations feels so neutral? It isn't. Maps are arguments, and Tartaria lost that argument. As newer atlases were printed, old ones were archived, some were reclassified, others simply stopped being reproduced. Libraries replaced outdated collections, schools updated curricula. Over time, a simple fact emerged: if something isn't taught, it might as well not exist. But fragments remained. Private collections, museum basements, digital scans that survived just long enough to be noticed. And when researchers began comparing these old maps side by side, patterns emerged that couldn't be ignored. Tartaria wasn't random. Its borders aligned with regions that later experienced major resets, population changes, administrative overhauls, and cultural discontinuities, which leads to a more unsettling possibility. What if Tartaria didn't slowly decline but ended abruptly? No official records describe its fall, no decisive war, no single conquest. Instead, there's a gap, a silence, as if something was deliberately not recorded. History doesn't usually forget empires, it removes them. And that brings us to the final act. If Tartaria was real, organized, and influential, then its disappearance wasn't accidental. It was a narrative decision, one that allowed new powers to redraw borders without explaining what came before. And here's the real urgency. This isn't just about the past. Modern borders, identities, and conflicts are built on historical assumptions. If those assumptions are incomplete or false, then our understanding of the present is unstable. That's why these maps matter. They don't just show land. They show what we were allowed to remember, and what we weren't. So the next time someone tells you history is settled, ask them this. Why do the most accurate maps of their time disagree with the story we retold today? Because the disappearance of Tartaria wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. And decisions leave traces if you know where to look. In the next video, we'll examine the cities that once appeared inside Tartaria's borders, cities officially labeled as rebuilt or repurposed, but showing architectural features that don't match their supposed origins. If this video made you question maps, the next one will make you question cities themselves. Watch it next.